You're listening to the Life's Better podcast, where we say life is so much better with God, community, and purpose. My name is Jonathan Gleason. I am joined, as always, with Josh Doolin here. And today on the episode, we're going to be talking about this thing called empathy and how there are just so many benefits to live in a space where you are constantly being empathetic. Now, I think most of us, we've got a pretty good handle on that idea, at least maybe a kind of a working definition of empathy. We're going to try to define it in just a moment anyway, but in order to kind of get us thinking about empathy, we're going to do a little exercise, and you can participate with us while you're listening. But Josh, I'm going to share a story where things may not have been the most happy, and I'm going to put the burden of responsibility on you to try to explain how maybe that situation would have been better if empathy had been involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you're going to share a story, and then the burden is going to be on me to try to figure out, okay, could empathy make that situation better?
I'm excited. Let's do it.
So several months ago, I was hanging out with my boys. We actually planned to be a part of a march here in town that focused on rebuilding some of the racial tension, healing racial division. And so we were on this march, and probably about halfway through, we were going through a neighborhood, and people on the march, they had picked up the chant, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And one of the people living in this community came out to the edge of their property, and in between every single chant, with great gusto, a lot of volume, let's just say with a lot of anger, right when someone would say Black Lives Matter, he would shout and scream, all lives matter.
Yeah.
And those around him were hearing him, and he's like spitting while he's yelling. He's getting red in the face, and other people get really close to him, and they start, screaming all the louder, Black Lives Matter, and he says, all lives matter, and it goes back and forth. And I just kind of took a look at this whole scene. I thought, I think we're missing the point here.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, how could that have been any better if people were living out empathy?
Yeah, I don't want to act like I have all of the answers to everything that's happening in our country over the last year, but this is something that Emily and I talk about a lot with just, if people just took a step back and analyzed why people are saying those things. Don't just take them at face value. Analyze why maybe your neighbor or coworker who's African American would say Black Lives Matter. Yeah. What has been going on that would cause them to think that way, and then to turn around and say all lives matter, which is true. Yeah. But in a way that is like attacking that ideal. Right. Just seems backward, because we're saying the same thing. Yes. You're saying Black lives should matter, and if I'm saying all lives should matter, that does mean that Black lives should matter. Yeah. So why are we fighting? Exactly. If people were to understand that, and like in all honesty, that guy could have joined the walk if he believed that too. Yeah. I don't know. That's where I come from with this.
Yeah, no, 100%. In fact, I'm wearing a mask at the time, and so, he can't see my face. But as soon as I see him shouting, I realize this isn't helpful. So I even went over to him. I was like, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yes, you are right. All lives do matter, in hopes that he would see, yeah, we're saying that too when we say Black Lives Matter. I don't think he heard me over his own shouting, but I was trying to get him to that point. All right, your story.
All right, so I picked a theme for my two questions, or my two stories. Yeah. I decided to analyze some Disney films and see how the whole story could have probably been avoided had in the first 15 minutes something else happened. Sure. So the first one is a movie that I love, but I really hate the main character in the first 15 minutes, and it's in the Incredibles movie. Okay. And so obviously you get Mr. Incredible, and he's a little bit younger, and he's after this like French bad guy, right? Like with bombs and stuff. Yeah. And this little kid shows up who idolizes him, loves Mr. Incredible, wants to be Mr. Incredible, obviously doesn't have power, so he compensates through science and like different stuff like that, tries to help him out. And what does Mr. Incredible do? He basically says, you're a waste of my time, you're annoying me, you're causing me to not save the day. And then the ending part of that that sticks with the kid forever is he tells him to fly home, buddy. I work alone.
Yeah.
And so he becomes this incredible supervillain that even defeats Mr. Incredible at one point. How could all of that been avoided had there been empathy?
Yeah, and I think I can recognize where Mr. Incredible is coming from, because typically in any given situation, I think we step into a situation with our own expectations. This is how things should go. And he's thinking, okay, I need to defeat crime.
Yeah.
That's how this should go. What he needed to do with Buddy is, let me reflect on when I was 12 years old, like this kid. And I'm developing these muscles and these crazy abilities to do things. What did I want to do? Well, I wanted to help, and I wanted to use the creativity and the gifting that I had to maybe stop crime or, stop some sort of injustice. Well, that's the same thing that's stirring up in this kid's life. Yeah. I need to actually cultivate that, not just see it as an annoyance.
Yeah. No, I always thought towards the beginning, I was like, there's clearly a moment where this could have turned into a Batman-Robin situation.
Oh, yeah, good call.
But didn't, and now you have this villain.
I have never watched The Incredibles and had that thought before. But yeah, absolutely. It could have been a totally different movie had empathy been involved.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so I've got a son who... he enjoys yogurt with his breakfast. That's one of the things. Most meals, or at least most breakfasts, he'll have yogurt. But I've got 3 other sons who hate yogurt, hate the taste, hate the look, hate the smell, can't stand yogurt. So any given morning, depending on where this kid sits at the table, there can be a disruption because no one wants to be near him. And that creates tension at the breakfast table. So how could that situation get better if empathy was involved?
Okay. Which does it matter which of the kids?
Are you going to ask which kid?
Yeah.
For the sake of anonymity, I'm just going to say it's one of the kids.
Okay. So the kid who enjoys yogurt, if he maybe thought about it in a way of maybe a food that he doesn't enjoy, or is absolutely repulsed by, he could understand why being around his family members and eating this is disgusting to them, and maybe would choose to eat it, I guess, at a different table.
Or at least further away, maybe. Yeah.
But also with the family, if they can understand, like, what would it be like if you... loved this food and the rest of the family was repulsed by it and made fun of you for it, how would that make you feel? So understanding between both parties, I think, is also key to a lot of this, because even going back to your first one, if there's only understanding or empathy for one side, then you start to create this good versus evil plot that can often happen even in media. Like, that's why media sides are very, very different. Like, if you are right-wing or left-wing or have certain ideas, like, you can watch the media and be like, oh, well, they're cultivating empathy for this side. I need to join them. But in reality, empathy is a two-edged sword. Like, and you need to have it on both ends, or else it's not right. So
I'm glad you bring that up. That's good. Yeah.
All right. So second story.
Ready.
So this one is another Disney film. First 15 minutes, movie could have been solved. It's one of my least favorite. It's Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, really?
Gaston is this jerk who absolutely is super wealthy. It's like, I think it's Christmas Eve or something like that. I don't know. And this old lady shows up at his house and is clearly, in distress. If you think about where his mansion is, clearly shouldn't have anywhere else to go.
No, it's not Gaston. It's the original.
Oh, I'm thinking of it's the prince.
Yeah.
Does he have a name before Beast?
I know him as the Beast.
Yeah. We'll say the prince.
Yeah.
But he turns her away when she clearly needs a room. I mean, throughout the film, we see how large his mansion is. He probably wouldn't have even seen her in the night had he just invited her in. But he turns her away, and she puts a curse on him, and he turns into this horrible beast that somebody has to, like, also weirdly with her, like, how did you just have this in your back pocket to curse on this guy? But yeah, how could empathy have solved any of that?
Yeah, That one's an easy one, and that's probably one that it's, based on how writers write, they want to create the injustice. And so it's such an easy way to be empathetic. Someone could freeze to death. Invite them in their home or possibly cause death. Well, if you empathize with, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I might be out in the snow dealing with frostbite. Well, I'm going to go ahead and help that person out. Whether that woman is repulsive or not, it's a life, and I value life, and so I'm gonna put myself in their situation. On the part of the older woman, she might have actually been living out empathy to a certain extent, realizing those faults that were in him and creating an opportunity and environment for him to look at himself as someone in need. I'm a beast now. Will someone actually still see the value in me? So who knows? Maybe she was living it out.
If anything, I will say that she caused him to develop empathy.
Good call. Yeah.
She taught him what empathy was.
It may have been vengeance on her part, but something good came in the end. Yeah. Well, I think we all realize that there is a problem. The problem is we talk about how life is better in community, but not if someone's screaming at us and getting red in the face, not if someone is keeping us from staying warm when we're freezing outside, not when maybe we're being ostracized because of our yogurt habits, or even when it comes just to shaming people because they take a different view or a different perspective than we take. That's not going to cultivate great community. But empathy can actually help. And so we're gonna first define empathy, then we're gonna work through some benefits of living out empathy, and then we're going to look at a couple of ways that we can actually just develop this as a natural part of our lives. So let's first talk about defining it. I was reading an article that was originally written and published by Jason Cowell and Jen DeSetti. And they actually talk about how empathy really involves 3 parts. And so we'll talk about each part and give a couple examples, or at least one example of how to view this. So the first part of empathy is emotional sharing. So the example that I would give to this is, let's say you walk into a memorial service and you see a group over there and they're crying and they're embracing, and immediately, you get a lump in your throat and you are fighting back tears. Well, guess what? You're emotionally sharing. You are now experiencing the same emotion that they are experiencing. Now, you may have just come from your car and you were listening to like Michael Jackson's Thriller. Your mind is not anywhere in that emotional state, but as soon as you see it, well, that's when empathy kicks in and you actually feel what they are feeling. That's the first part of empathy.
And then the second part is empathic or empathetic. Empathic, right? Empathic concern, which is the desire to care for, sorry, my handwriting's bad. Desire to care for a need that you see. So not only is emotional sharing important, where you start to feel what the other person is feeling, but now you want to help alleviate that pain. And so in the same example, let's say the person is at a memorial service, you see a person who is grieving, you want to somehow, and I know obviously we don't necessarily have the ability in that moment to take away that pain, but we desire to. We desire to go up, put an arm around them, to hug them, to show them love and kindness, to help bring them out of whatever they're feeling. Super important part of it.
This next one is actually, they refer to it as perspective taking. I think this is probably what most people go to when they're trying to define empathy. And this is the idea of putting yourself in another person's shoes, putting yourself in another person's situation. So again, we'll just use the same example of memorial service. You may enter that memorial service not even really knowing the individual, not really in a sense of grieving, but you can look at the situation and you can know exactly what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And this, again, would be an aspect of empathy. So let's talk about some different qualities, or at least some benefits to living out empathy. There's probably thousands. We're just going to look at 2, and we're going to give some examples of this. So the first example of why empathy can be so important is that empathy keeps our anger in check. Empathy can actually keep your anger in check. let me first of all say that it's not actually wrong to get angry. Jesus himself got angry, and it was justifiable anger. It was, I think, in church terms, we call it righteous anger. So it's okay to get angry. But I think we all know there's a line between, getting angry and then sinning. The difference is what you do with the anger. So maybe calling up 911, having the police officers come and deal with the situation, as opposed to you grabbing your gun and like firing off a few rounds. Like, you don't cross those type of lines. So it's okay to be angry, but understand that empathy can actually kind of keep that anger in check and keep you from, going to the dark side of anger. A couple weeks ago, I brought home some work, and I was actually working on editing a video. It was a clip that I needed to use for a sermon. And Josh, you do a lot of editing, and so to match up the sound to the visual just right, you got to really hear what you're needing to hear.
Yeah.
And when you're at home, and you've got poor kids who are being loud and crazy, I mean, I don't care how cranked the volume is going to get. Sometimes it's difficult. So I had already told the boys, hey, you need to be quiet. My dad's working on this. Meanwhile, I've got another child who is standing right next to me, and he's got this cup, and he's just banging the cup over and over and over again on the countertop. And I could just sense and I could feel like the anger rising in me, because I just want to be done with this project and I just need silence for like 10 seconds. And I'm just hearing clunk, 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 clunk. And so I'm getting angry, and the thought comes to my mind of, why can't he empathize with what I'm going through right now? I've asked him to be quiet. He should know. And then it dawns on me, wait, am I being empathetic here? And I just, again, like you said, I take that step back and I just evaluated where he's at. And immediately I think, okay, he's so bored right now. His brothers are in the other room doing some weird game that he's not interested in. Dad's been away all day, and now he's home and he's working again, not engaged with him. And he also has this cup, and I've been there. When you're bored and you don't have anything to do and you're trying to spend your time wisely, sometimes it's actually quite satisfying just kind of bang a cup on the counter. And I realized, okay, I'm just going to politely ask him to stop. And then I'm going to hustle through what I'm doing, and then I'm going to engage him. And that's what I did. I finished my project, and I was like, hey, let's go play some indoor volleyball, because that's like our favorite wintertime game. And it worked out really well. But I noticed that I needed to be empathetic. Otherwise, my anger would have taken that time with my kid in a really bad place. There's plenty of verses that actually speak into developing and needing to cultivate empathy. God's created us with this wonderful ability to actually step in other people's situations and understand what they're going through. And so it's no wonder that even Jesus speaks about it. One of the thoughts that comes to my mind is even, the golden rule. Jesus says, hey, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What is he doing? He's trying to cultivate empathy in us, where we're able to look and say, oh, I get it. Okay, if I was in your situation, this is how I'd want to be treated. Yeah. I guess I better do that for them. And again, that's just one verse, but over and over again, we see this theme in Scripture that tells us, no, hey, it's not just about you. You got to think beyond yourself. So one of the benefits of having empathy in your life, it actually might curb some of your anger. So if you find yourself as someone who's just a rage-a-hol, develop some empathy, and maybe that will actually be tempered just a bit. There's another aspect that can really be encouraging, and that is the fact that it can cause us to act. This is the part where we're going to kind of hone in on even developing purpose and continuing the purpose that God has called you to. There's a really good quote that you're going to share that Mother Teresa kind of speaks into this a bit.
Yeah, she says, if I look at the mass, I will never act, but if I look at the one, I will.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so the mass is referring to a problem as a whole. If I just hear about a number of people afflicted with, hunger, or a number of people afflicted with disease, I'm less likely to have that empathy kick in than if I were to meet a person or hear a person's story specifically, put a name and a family and all of that to a person. Yeah. I'm a lot more inclined to act. And I've actually joked about something like this before, where if you just tell me this person is doing something wrong to you, and I don't know their name, like I'm more likely to be like, oh, that person's the worst. But if you were to tell me like, oh, but this person has a cat and its name is Fluffy and it has he's a brother and like all these different things about this person, I'm more likely to be like, oh, well, but what did you do? Like how can we look at this? How can we make that person's life better? Like all you need is like one or two facts about a person. And then you start to realize, oh, they're just like me, if that makes sense.
It's interesting, though, Josh, because if someone were to tell me, and this person has a cat, I'd be like, oh, yeah, let him burn. That guy deserves...
You can't empathize with that at all.
Puppy, maybe,
yeah,
but
yeah,
no, I'm teasing.
Yeah.
To all you cat lovers out there, kittens are wonderful. They really are.
Kittens.
Big cats, tigers, lions, I'm all for. Yeah. House cats, they're a little creepy. They are. One of the thoughts that comes to my mind is actually a story. When I was in high school, I think even beyond high school, but immigration is always a hot topic in the United States.
Yeah.
Living in California might have been a little bit hotter too, with us being on the border with Mexico. And in high school, I had just a really clear picture, at least what I thought was a clear picture of how immigration is. And my thought was, hey, there are legal ways to immigrate to the United States. And there are illegal ways to immigrate to the United States. Stick with the legal, and if you go ahead and go to the illegal ways, don't be surprised if you get deported. That was my thought. About a year or two into my first ministry position as a youth pastor, I realized that one of my students was actually an illegal immigrant. He had a family, single mom. She was working in housekeeping at a reputable hotel, and all the papers to allow her to do that completely fabricated. They were falsified. They were there illegally. And what's interesting, though, is I loved him. Even before I knew he was an illegal immigrant, he was actually one of the students that probably volunteered more hours to the church than all the students combined. And I loved his brothers, and they were just a fantastic family. And when I heard that they were illegal immigrants, I knew right then when I heard it, was like, well, if they ever get into a situation where they're there's a threat of deportation, man, I'm going to fight for them, and I'm going to make sure that that doesn't happen. And it dawned on me, oh, hey, what's going on here? There's something in me that may hate the idea of immigration, but I love the idea of the immigrant. And it's like, what is that? Okay, well, it's because I can resonate with not the mass, but the individual. And once there's a story behind it, like you were saying, well, that just created all kinds of empathy in me, and it caused me to want to act on their behalf. And I think this is really important for us in community, that we're at our best oftentimes when we are serving and when we are meeting needs and when we see wrong and we're fighting for justice. But that will never happen unless we take the time to empathize with those around us. And so those are just two benefits of empathy. The list could go on and on and on. But what we thought we'd do is just share just a couple of ways maybe we can actually all cultivate empathy in our lives. And the first way really has to do with what we just shared. It's the idea of chasing the story. Josh, I am a huge sucker for a good story. I think most human beings love stories. That's why people write books. That's why movies are made. That's why we can sit and talk for way too long, because we're just sharing stories. I've noticed that even when I'm teaching, I will be sharing just this impassionate plea of how much God loves us and how we need to respond to God's love. And then I notice no one cares. I can just see it on their face. I can see in their body language. They're like drifting off to sleep. But then I might say something like, the other day I was in my garage and my youngest son was on his little scooter. And we've always told him he has to wear shoes when he's on his scooter. But he's heading down the driveway. And I am right now, Josh, just to pause the story, I'm making the story up right now. But my guess is every single one of you who are listening, you just leaned in just a little bit more, like, oh, there's a story being told. And your mind's already whirling, and you're starting to think through, oh, was there an injury? Is that poor little guy's feet okay? You're already thinking through these things, because why? We're engaged in story. What does this have to do with empathy, though? What it has to do with is every single one of our lives, it's telling a story. And when we take the time to recognize that every single person that we come in contact with has a story, and we actually maybe even take the time, maybe not to have a conversation with them, but just kind of evaluate, I wonder what their story is, it's going to naturally cultivate empathy. And there is power behind this. I'll give a quick example of this. So in 1780, slavery was alive and well in the UK. In fact, there were about 500,000 African slaves who were all working themselves to death in the sugar plantations of the Caribbean. Why? Because British people, they love their tea, and tea is really good with sugar. So it was just a natural part of the economy, just like our oil is a natural part of our economy, and none of us would imagine our economy functioning without oil. They couldn't imagine their economy functioning without slavery. But then a civil rights movement began, and the fuel that birthed this civil rights movement was actually empathy. The tool to fan empathy into the hearts and minds of people was story. And what they did was they took images. We've all probably seen it, but you've got that picture of a boat, and inside the boat you can see, slave body after slave body after slave body, all packed in the hull of a ship, inches apart. And they knew that, okay, wait, that ship sailed from Africa all the way to the Caribbean, which takes weeks, and they're crammed in there like sardines. Wait, that's a human? And what do we get? We capture that thought of, this is a story, this is someone's life. And then they grabbed, former slaves, and they had them tour the UK and share their story of being a slave. And this began to fuel empathy in the hearts and minds of the British people and the population. And so they boycotted, and they eventually ended the slave trade in the UK as a result of story. So we've got a challenge for you. Josh would like to share the challenge.
Yeah, so it all has to do with that chase the story. If you can, whenever you're in that situation and you start to feel that anger rise up even, if you can start to take that person's story, or at least inquire about what they're going through, and you wrote it as an interested inquirer. Don't just be a person who's listening, like actually want to know the story. And in the moment that, honestly, our bodies were built, God gave us an innate sense of empathy once this starts to happen. So if you can turn that person's tale into a story that you're going to slowly start to empathize with, you're going to see less anger, you're going to start seeing more peace, you're going to start seeing more reconciliation. And I mean, I don't know how many people can feel this, but this year, I feel like more than anything has been a year of not really understanding the other side, if that makes sense, for a bunch of different issues. So if we can start to do that, if you can think of the one thing in the back of your mind that you're always angry about, find a person who doesn't think that way and start to understand their story.
Yeah.
So chase that story.
Yeah, that's good. The other aspect that we would encourage you to implement in order to cultivate empathy would be to find the bridge between you and others, not the chasm. This is what we're seeing this year. You just mentioned it. It's that us versus them mentality. And throw out an issue and you can see two sides. Us, we're the right ones. Yeah. Others, they're the wrong ones.
My father-in-law says that there's always two sides to the bologna, no matter how thin you slice it. So I don't know. I've always thought that was a pretty funny example of how, there's always going to be another side.
And so when you find yourself trying to, only look at the chasm, this is why they're wrong, this is why we're right, pause and just look for what actually might bridge the two of you closer. A silly example might be, we live in the wonderful state of Kentucky, and we've got a governor, Beshear, who does not always make the most enjoyable choices for everyone. It doesn't take long to hear people kind of give him a hard time for what he's mandating and what he's encouraging. And so there's just a lot of hate for good buddy Andy. But what if, let's just use Andy as an example, what if you just started looking for bridges rather than the chasm? It might be really simple. It might just be reflecting on your own story. What do you like when you come home? What do you like being greeted by your kids with warm hugs and a kiss from your wife? Well, guess what? Andy, he's got two kids who probably love hugging him, love kissing him when he comes home. A wife who wants to show some love to him. Guess what? You have that in common. So now he's a little less of a villain, and he's a little bit more like you. The chasm just got closer. Think about your workplace. there are times where you have to make decisions that not everyone enjoys, not everyone likes. And so don't you like when people give you the benefit of the doubt and don't immediately try to villainize you? Well, Andy's probably the same way. He wants maybe just a little bit more of the population to give him the benefit of the doubt and not just cast him as a villain. Look for those things that bridge the two of you closer rather than just looking at the chasm. And my guess is you're going to find out that life begins to look a lot better in community. That you have a purpose where maybe you're actually chasing down people to draw them closer to a relationship with God, because that's what's brought you so much life.
Yeah.
That's our encouragement for you guys, and we encourage you to look at ways that you can continue to develop empathy in your life.